Hello students, welcome back to this session. So in the last session we got to know that the Trojans were completely inside the city, and they had huge walls which were covered. So huge walls were there and they had full protection. The walls were being protected and the soldiers were standing there, and the walls were so huge that one could stand on it and relax on it. So yeah, यहाँ तक हम लोग ने देखा. We were on page number 41. Now let us start with the third paragraph. Thus Troy was a strong city, strongly protected by its wall and strongly defended by its brave soldiers. But all the kings and heroes of Greece has declared war against the Trojan because Paris, a prince of Troy, had persuaded Helen, who was wife of a Greek king, Menelaus, to elope with them. जैसे मैंने आपको इंट्रोडक्शन में एज आई सेड यू गाइज अर्लियर दैट ऑल ऑफ दिस वॉर was because of this king Helen who ran away with Paris. तो यहाँ पे वही बताया है that all of the kings who were angry, right? All of the Greece kings who were angry. Why? Because उनके जो किंग थे Menelaus, उनकी वाइफ थी Helen, and the Paris took Helen to Trojan, and that is why Greece declared a war against Trojan. He had brought her to Troy. The Greeks wanted to take revenge on Troy for the wrong done to Menelaus. They sailed to Troy and laid siege to the city. The Trojans too fought hard, and the siege continued for 10 long years, as we saw in the introduction, right? That the Menelaus declared the war against Trojans, and then there was the huge war which was held between Trojans and Greece for 10 long years. The fighting went on daily, but the siege did not end. What do you mean by siege, student? Siege is the area like where the army surrounds the area. The army is surrounded into a particular area. एक particular area को जब army surround करती है, when it has army protection, is called siege. So that siege continued for 10 long years. The fighting went on daily, but the siege did not end. The siege did not end. Like the army protection was always there, it did not end. On the other hand, the Greeks could not take the city, and on the other hand, the Trojans could not force them to sail away, right? The Greeks were not able to take the city. Why? Because the walls were huge enough. So Greeks were not able to take the Trojans, and Trojans were also not ready to surrender themselves. Every day the Trojans came out of their gates and the Greeks came out of their tents, and ships and fighting went on. Sometimes there were great battles between the two armies, right? Where were the Greeks staying? At the place near the sea. We saw last time, right, that the Trojan was completely surrounded by sea. तो वो sea के area पे they made tents and they were staying in them. So sometimes the Trojans used to come out of the gate and fight with the Greece, and the Greece soldiers used to come out of their tents. Since they were staying in tents, they used to come out of the tents, and then there used to be fighting, and there were many soldiers who lost their life, and they were continuously fighting. Sometimes there were great battles between the two armies. Sometimes there were single fights between two great heroes. कि कोई बार क्या होता था, the two great heroes, they used to fight single. Sometimes the Trojan had the better of it, and sometimes the Greece. But sometimes it was on the side of Trojans कि ज़्यादा कभी Greece के army मर जाते थे, or sometimes it was on the side of Greece that sometimes many army of Trojans used to die. So as such things went on because it was a huge war. Like 10 years is a big thing, but still the fighting went on. Great heroes on both the sides were killed in the course of the war. That both the heroes of both the sides were killed during this period. After leading the defense of his city for 9 years, the brave Hector was at last killed by Achilles, whom none could resist. Okay, we remember, do you guys remember who was Hector? Hector was the first king. Okay, first king. Kiska king tha? We saw he was the first son of Priam, right? He was the first son of Priam and he was killed by Achilles. Okay, so Achilles killed Priam. Achilles killed Hector. Hector was of Troy and Achilles was of Greece. Okay, so Hector was killed by Achilles, but Achilles himself was killed later on by a poison arrow that entered his heel, the only part of his body where he could be wounded. Okay, and then later on Achilles was also killed. Do you guys remember the story which I said you earlier, that Achilles ka wo ek portion tha at the part of his leg which cannot be, like if someone kills him, like that cannot be wounded, वो कभी ठीक नहीं हो सकता था, and at that point only a poisoned arrow was hit to him and that is how he also died. So okay, Achilles also died at that moment. Still later, Paris himself was killed also by a poisoned arrow, and later on the Paris himself, the second child of the king, the prime king, he was also killed by a poisoned arrow, जिसके वजह से ये सब हुआ. He brought Helen towards the Troy, right? So he was also killed. The Trojans were tired of being shut up in their city and the Greeks were longing to see their homes again. But still the fighting went on, that even the Trojans were tired, right? Now we also in this current situation, we are tired of staying homes. It's only 6 months. वहाँ पे तो it was like 10 years they were completely locked in their city, in their homes. So even they were tired and the Greeks were not giving up, so even they kept on fighting and the fighting was still on. Okay students, now come to part number 2. At last Troy was taken not by force but by a trick. So how did the Greeks capture the Troy? Since we are learning that Troy was completely surrounded by soldiers, it has army on their borders, it has huge walls, everything was protected, then how did Greece took over the Troy? It was by a trick कि उनको फूल बनाया गया था, एक ट्रिक यूज़ किया था. Which was that trick? We will see further. It was the cunning Odysseus who thought of a plan to obtain the victory. Okay, so it was the cunning Odysseus. Odysseus आपको सबको याद है, he was from Greece side. And cunning, what do you mean by cunning students? Cunning is clever in a bad way. Okay, so what was his trick? Let us see. Let us build a great wooden horse, he said, big enough to hold men inside it, and let some of our best fighters hide in the horse. Okay, then let us burn our tents and pretend to sail away in our ships. But instead of sailing away, we will return in the night. When the Trojans are asleep, we will attack the city and burn and kill. So what was the plan of Odysseus? He thought that we will make a huge horse in front of this Troy. Okay, एंड वी विल बर्न द टेंट्स, जो टेंट्स में हम लोग रह रहे थे उसको हम लोग जला देंगे. एंड देन वी विल प्रिटेंड दैट वी आर गोइंग बैक, दैट वी आर टायर्ड ऑफ दिस वॉर एंड वी आर गोइंग बैक टू आवर प्लेस. ओके, बट वी विल नॉट गो फार अवे, वी विल स्टे nearby an island. Okay, and then when they will think okay now they are free from us, they will open up the gates, and once they open up the gates we will enter and then burn their house, burn their homes. Is the plan cleared students? आपको plan समझा? Odysseus का plan क्या था? That they will just make a horse and pretend to go back to their place, but they won't go. The Greeks' leader decided to follow the advice of the wise Odysseus, that they thought, okay, he's telling right, and they decided to follow this. So a great horse of wood was made by a skillful engineer, and the greatest heroes, Menelaus कौन था? जिसकी वाइफ थी हेलेन, जिसको पेरिस लेके गया था. Odysseus himself and others entered it. The last man to go in being the architect himself, who knew the secrets of opening and shutting the entrance. Okay, so they finally took the help of an engineer and made a huge horse. So who was inside the horse? The Menelaus, जिसकी wife थी Helen, he was there inside. The Odysseus himself, जिसका ये plan था, and the architecture, okay, and the engineer. Okay, yeah, and the architecture. Who was the architecture? The one who knows कि horse के कौन से, where are the gates, so that they could open and attack to Troy. Okay, so all of these people were there inside the horse. That evening, the Greeks burned their tents and sailed away in their ships. Okay, what do you mean by sailed away, students? That they went to their places, okay, and they burned their tents just to make sure that Troy feels like they have left. The people in the Troy feels that they have left the city in their ships, but they did not go very far. Only one man who was left behind to persuade the Trojans to drag the horse into their city. Okay, so what did they do? कि सब लोग चले गए थे. Only there was this one person who was sitting near the horse, so that they can take the horse inside it. Persuade. What do you mean by persuade, student? Persuade is to make something do. Okay, to make someone do something, कि किसी को कुछ काम करने बोलते हैं, उसको बोलते हैं persuade. Okay, now let us see what happened next day. Next day, the Trojans woke up expecting to go out and fight as they had done for the past 10 years. So for Trojans, it was a usual day. They went out and they started fighting. But what did they see? What delight and surprise they felt at the sight they saw on the seashore outside the walls. Okay, that they were delighted is happy, and at the same time they were shocked. Why they were shocked? Because they saw something on the seashore. Okay, seashore outside the walls. What did they saw? What did they see, students? They basically, the tents were burning, right? It seemed that the long siege was over at last. Okay, so the siege was completely over. The Greek soldiers were not there, so they thought that this is completely done. The tents had been burned. The tents were being burnt. The shore was deserted. What do you mean by deserted? Deserted is empty. The shore was completely empty, and the Greek ships had all gone. Okay, so they thought, okay, now we are free. It's peace at last. Okay, they thought, chalo ab shanti hai. They cried and opened wide the gates and came out in large numbers on the plain, glad to be free again to go where they pleased. That now they were very happy that all of the Greek soldiers had gone, and then they opened up the huge gates and all of them came into large numbers on the ground. Okay. Then they saw on the sands the huge wooden horse. They gathered round in it astonishment. Okay, they were all happy, and at the same time they were shocked to see this huge horse. For it was indeed a wonderful piece of work, that it was a wonderful piece of art, and they were looking to the horse. As they were wondering how the horse had been built and why it has been left behind, they found a Greek with his hands tied together lying under it. Okay, उनका plan था, right, that they left one of the Greek soldiers, so they were all thinking कि ये कैसे बनाया होगा, and at the same time when they were thinking, they saw this Greek soldier who was lying there, whose hands were died. Okay, when the Trojans dragged him out, the man pretended to be very frightened of them. When he was commanded to tell them why the Greeks had gone and why they had left this horse behind, he pretended to tremble very much and refused to speak. So also this was also a part of their plan, students. What they what they have decided that they will leave one of the Greek soldiers. Okay, तो जब ट्रोजन्स ने उसको पकड़ा, they asked that why are you trembling is to shiver. He was acting as if he is very worried, he is very scared of this Trojans. And then when he was forced, he said the Trojans forced him that you either say us or you would be killed. At that time ही देखो यहाँ पे क्या लिखा है, ही वॉज प्रिटेंडिंग टू ट्रेम्बल, नाटक कर रहा था वो, ट्रेम्बल इज टू शिवर. एंड देन ही रिफ्यूज टू स्पीक, के उसने बोला नो आई वोंट से यू, आई डोंट नो कि ये लोग ने यहाँ पे ये हॉर्स क्यों छोड़ के गए हैं वैसे. When at last they threatened to kill him, he spoke and told them the false tale. Okay, but at last Trojan said that are you telling us, or else we will kill you. And when the Greek soldier heard that he would kill them, he would be killed by them, he decided to tell the truth. But the truth was something only. जो false story वो लोग ने बनाई थी, क्या थी story देखते हैं. The Greeks are tired of the long war and have sailed away in their ships. Okay, he's saying that they are tired and they left, but they are afraid of the long voyage home too. Okay, voyage is a long journey by sea, and so they have made this horse and left it as an offering to the god of the sea. They wanted also to kill me and offer me as a sacrifice to the sea god, but I escaped and hid from them. Okay, so what false story is that Greece soldier saying? This Greece soldier is saying that they are very tired of this long journey by sea, and that is why they made this horse. And उन्होंने क्या किया? They decided to serve this horse as a gift to the sea god. हम बोलते हैं ना नदी देवता, वैसे. तो they decided कि ये horse को हम नदी देवता को gift करेंगे. ये सब क्या था? This was a false story. And then they were also about to give me as a sacrifice. They were about to sacrifice me, but I saved my life and escaped from there. This was the story which the Greek soldier said to the Trojans. The Trojans were delighted to hear this, that they were very happy to hear this. The Greeks have gone, they said, and the walls are no longer necessary. Let us make a hole in the wall and drag the horse in. Okay, so they were very happy with this horse, and they thought कि अभी the soldiers of Greece has left, so we will make a hole inside this wall, because the walls were huge, right? So such a big horse cannot go inside. So they decided to break the wall and let the horse go inside. Why? Because they all were very happy with the structure of horse, and they thought that let us keep this horse inside a city. Okay, their wise priest warned their wise priest warned them not to do so. It may be a trick that will ruin us, he said. Ruin is destroy us. You will bring disaster on the city if you break down the walls. But they were so excited that they paid no attention to his words. They broke down part of the strong wall in order to drag the horse in. Okay, so among the Trojans, the one who was very wise soldier, the wise priest, he also warned them. Warn मतलब एक warning दिया कि this might be a trick. Okay, they were waiting for 10 long years. Why would they give up so easily? ये कोई trick होगा. Please don't take the horse inside. But all of these other soldiers of Trojans, they were not listening to him, because they were just very happy by the structure of the horse, and thus they made a hole in the wall. Why a hole in the wall? So that they can take the horse inside the city. All that day the Trojans feasted. Okay, all that day the Trojans feasted and drank and celebrated. What do you mean by feasted? Feasted is the past form of feast, which is a very delicious meal. So then it was like a party for them because they were finally rid of Greek soldiers, right? So they were drinking, they were celebrating, there were huge feast. After all the celebrations they went to sleep and slept soundly. But that day of rejoicing was soon followed by a night of terror and death. दैट वही उनको दे डिडंट न्यू कि आज जितना हम खुशी मना रहे वही शायद हमारा लास्ट डे होगा खुशी मनाने का. वाई? बिकॉज द हॉर्स वॉज इनसाइड द सिटी एंड इन द हॉर्स वर दिस ह्यूज strong soldiers. The Greeks' ship had not sailed far. Also, the Greeks, जो Greeks की ships थी, they didn't went any far. They were just by a nearby island and they were hiding there. As soon as they were hidden by an island, they had lowered their sails and dropped anchor and waited for the night. Anchor is, you know that anchor होता है, they drop that into the water so that ships stop at a particular place. तो उन्होंने वही किया, they dropped that anchor in the water and then the ship was stopped at a particular island. In the darkness the fleet sailed back and the leading ship, which was Agamemnon's, bore a red light high on his mast. Okay, what are they saying? That now Agamemnon, who was Agamemnon's student, do you guys remember? He was the big brother of Menelaus. Okay, so he was the one who was leading the ship, and then he gave the signal to whom? The soldier, जो ग्रीस का soldier था वहाँ पे बाहर, जो हाथ पकड़ के टाइड था, जिन्होंने फॉल्स स्टोरी सुनाई थी. सो ही सेंट देम अ सिग्नल. ओके, द ग्रीक हु वाज वाचिंग फॉर द रिटर्न ऑफ द फ्लीट crept to the wooden horse and gave them the signal. That he also gave them the signal that yeah, you guys can return to the Trojan. The side of the horse opened. The Greeks climbed out and opened the gates, and फिर धीरे से the gates were open and then the soldiers came inside. The whole Greek army entered the sleeping city. Immediately the Greeks set fire to the house and towers and palaces and began to burn and kill. Okay, finally they were inside the city and they did what they wanted to. What they wanted to was they wanted to kill the city, they wanted to burn the city. So they did that. They killed the army, they killed the soldiers of the Trojans, and then they made fire, they kept fire, they burned the houses which was there inside the city. Troy was filled with the sight of leaping flames and the sound of shouting and the noise of weapons and the cries of weeping women. That now finally the city was completely in destruction. The houses were on fire, the soldiers were shouting, the people were shouting, the women out were trying to get help. So all of the city was in fire. The sleeping Trojans sprang out of their beds, but they were taken by surprise. The enemies were right inside their walls. All of them were shocked. Okay? How were they inside the walls? How were they inside the city? And many of the Trojans were killed before they could put on their armor and seize the weapons. And उस time पे if the soldiers were getting ready to kill other soldiers of Greece, even before that also they were killed. कि ये पहनने से पहले only they were killed. A bright light lit up the night sky as palaces and houses, temples and towers went up in flames. That the entire city was in flames because the entire city was burning. The Trojans fought as well as they could, but it was all in vain. All in vain is all in waste because कितने ही सही थे, even they were not prepared for it. Once अगर उनको पता होता कि वो लोग आने वाले हैं तो एटलीस्ट वो प्रिपेयर रहते, but this was like all of a sudden. old king Priam was killed with all his brave sons, right? हम लोग ने देखा पहले Hector was killed, then later on Paris was killed, and now even Priam was killed. So the Priam and all of his sons were also killed. Hector's wife and his old mother and sister were carried off as slaves by the conquerors. Now, what do you mean by conquerors? The one who had conquered the city were the Greeks, right? So all of these जो left थे, the Hector's wife, उनकी mom and उसकी sister, they were being treated as slaves. Their fate was in contrast to Helen's when King Menelaus rushed through the city looking for her and found her in her palace. And then the main reason क्यों हो रहा था ये war, because Menelaus wanted to take Helen back to her kingdom. So he went to the place where Helen was staying, and he finally met Helen over there in her palace. She hung her head in shame and sorrow as she faced her former husband. She was in a shame, right? किसी को भी लगेगा कि has to, वहाँ से वो भाग के आई थी, right, with prince, with Paris. So she was in sorrow, and at the same time she was feeling shameful that why I did this. Her voice was choked with emotion and she could not speak, that she was completely shocked that उसके वजह से ये सब चीज़ें हो रहा था. She was completely shocked and she could not speak anything when she saw her husband, who was Menelaus. But Menelaus forgave her and she went back with him. But Menelaus was a person who forgave her, and फिर he took her back with him, for it was only Aphrodite who had turned her heart away from her home and her husband and her child. Remember Aphrodite? Aphrodite कौन थी? उसकी खुद की बहन, the sister of Helen, who made a promise to Paris that if you give me that apple, I will give you a beautiful woman, the prettiest woman. Remember Aphrodite? So it was all because of Aphrodite, right? The condition made Paris force Helen to take her back to Troy. When morning came, nothing was left of the proud, rich city that has resisted attack for 10 years. But the morning was completely a disaster for them, right? Because all of the city was into flames and it was burning. Remember, ये सब किसके वजह से मेन तो हुआ? हेलेन है, सही है, हेलेन के वजह से हुआ. बट रिमेंबर द starting thing, the myth which was created in the starting when Paris was born. They were said that this boy would be the destruction for Troy, that if this child was born, Troy would be destroyed. And that is why the Priam जो king था, he left him in the forest. अगर उसी टाइम पे उसको लाया नहीं होता वापस, तो this would have not been the situation, right? Priam brought Paris back, and that is how Paris came with Helen and this situation took place. उसके वजह से, पेरिस के वजह से पूरा ये हुआ. The Troy was completely destroyed. Understood the chapter, students? Now coming to page number 42, the part 1 part, the side questions you guys already do in homework, right? So coming to page number 42, your homework, let's talk about workshop. The first one, read the passage and name the following. You just have to name the following. He composed the Iliad and Odyssey. हम लोग ने देखा Homer, right? Homer was the one who was composing Iliad and Odyssey. So you just have to write the names. He persuaded Helen to elope with him. Helen किसके साथ भाग गई थी? Paris, right? So all of these things are आगे का easy, you would do in homework. Now you have to find antonyms. Antonyms is opposite. So first one is barren. Barren का opposite क्या होगा? Fertile. You have to find it from the passage. तो हम लोग ने देखा the lands were fertile. Second is cowardly. What do you mean by cowardly? Darpok. तो उसका opposite bravely. Offended, defended. Next would be homework, students. You guys can do it. Sub question 3. From other source, find synonyms. You have to find same meanings. Other source, not from the passage. Great hero. You have to find synonyms for great and which would describe hero. You can write brave for great hero, right? Second one is beautiful woman. You can write pretty, fight, and verb. You can write defend. Are you guys getting it? The rest of them would be homework. Now you have to correct the following sentence using facts. Okay, so for the sentences are false, you have to correct them. Troy traded in cattle and grass with other cities. Was it true? No. What did Troy trade in? It traded in goods and grains, not cattle and grass. During war, Trojans jumped over the fort gates to fight the enemy. No, right? Trojans were not jumping off. तो क्या कर रहे थे? You have to write. Third, Helen eloped with Menelaus. No, किसके साथ वो भाग गई थी? With Paris. Okay, so these are the statements which are wrong and you just have to correct them. So बाकी का would be homework. Now coming to sub question 5. Okay, you have to write the counter actions. के यहाँ पे सिर्फ एक टॉपिक दिया है, उसके वजह से what situations took place वो आपको लिखना है. So the first one is Helen eloped with Paris. Okay, so when Helen ran with Paris, what happened? It was all the things were declared, right? That there was the declaration of war between Greece and Trojans. So you can write this. The second was the Greeks sailed to Troy and attacked it. Okay, so when the Greeks sailed to Troy and attack, what happened? The Trojans too fought, right? The Trojans were also fighting, and the sea was continued for 10 years. So you can write there. The C and D would be your homework. Leave the part 6, 7 because it is grammar and we will do when we do the grammar session. Now come to page number 47, workshop of part 2. Find out and write the Greek and Trojan names. Simple. You guys can do homework. List all the words related to war. Even this one is easy. You guys can do it as homework. Now sub question 3. A horse big enough to hold man inside it. Okay, so big enough, you have to write something similar to that kind. Make sentences basically. So this is also homework, students. You guys can do it. Sub question 4. Put the following events in the order in which they took place. Okay, so now you know the passage. Now you know how the story took place. The options are jumbled. You have to do it in proper form. Yeah, I want this. Sub question 5 is the main homework which I want from you all, students. That imagine that you got to know the trick, the story of Trojans, the story of Greece, that you got that idea. आपको पता है कि Trojans horse के through अंदर आने वाले. So if you knew this idea, make a counter plan to defeat the Greeks. Okay, so now you have to defeat the Greeks. So which plan you will make? According to you, you have to write it down. So this is like a personal response question. So this is main your homework I want you all to do. इसके अलावा while talking about part 2, the questions which are besides the passage, like when you come to page number 44, तो बाजू में देखो question है like how did Odysseus plan to defeat the Trojans, what was the reason for Troy to rejoice and celebrate. वैसे 45 and 46 पे एक या दो question होंगे, ये आपका homework रहेगा. Fine, understood, students? So yeah, for this much we will do this much only for today's session since the time is also up. So yeah, that was it for today's session, students. I hope you have understood the chapter, the story, and we'll see you all in the next session. Till then, bye bye and take care. Bye.